Hey guys, EvanNova95 here, coming at you with another Star Wars discussion video. One of the most iconic aspects of the Order of the Sith Lords is their almost universal use of red-hued lightsaber blades, as opposed to the variety of colors employed by their sworn enemies, the Jedi Knights. As noted by multiple sources, the reason for this distinction was that red crystals, be they natural or synthetic, glowed in harmonic vibration when energized by the dark side of the Force, making them the perfect weapon for the Dark Organization. While red lightsabers were generally more unstable than any other hue, they were also considered to be far more dangerous, even having the potential to break the energy blades produced by the other variants. However, despite this long-standing tradition, there have been a handful of Sith over the generations who have not wielded crimson blades. And today we will be diving into the majority of these characters and assessing whether or not their choice of saber color aligned with their characters. Now, I originally planned this video to be fully scripted. However, given the sheer amount of discussion that could be had with this topic, and the fact that other video makers have taken a similar approach, I have decided to follow the route I took with my Feats I Missed video, and make the rest of this an unscripted, free-flowing fireside chat. However, as I said in that video, fireside chats are rather difficult to make without another human being to bounce off of, so I've gone and acquired another human being. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Jenserai 1.
What makes you think I'm human?
You do have a point there. All right, man, are you ready to discuss some sabers?
Oh, absolutely. Let's do this.
Okay, well, with that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, starting off in the distant eras of the distant past, we have the Lords of the Old Sith Empire as portrayed in the Tales of the Jedi series. Specifically, characters like Marka Ragnos, Naga Sadow, and Ludo Kresh, who not only didn't utilize red lightsaber blades, actually opted to do away with lightsabers entirely by utilizing ancient Sith swords crafted from alchemy. Definitely gives it a more rugged feel, befitting of the times, if I do say so myself.
The interesting thing is that the Sith of this era actually did have access to lightsabers and synthetic crystals. The Lost Tribe of the Sith short stories describes that they had those, and we actually have one of the fallen Jedi Sith Lords of the era, Sace Rogan, depicted in the novel Crosscurrent, equipped with a red lightsaber. So they did have red lightsabers. They just seem to have fallen into disfavor. And in this case, it's more of a cultural thing. The Lords it's one of the aspects of how the Sith Empire is always kind of looking back and is obsessed with reliving past glories instead of moving forwards and seizing the future. They're running around with archaic weapons that they're wielding for reasons of honor and pride.
Not that these weapons are effective, as we've seen on various occasions. When imbued with the dark side of the Force, they could actually be rather devastating, even having the potential, as seen in the Jedi Academy game, to actually withstand traditional lightsaber blades. Again, very fitting for the times, I would say.
And I'd say it's also explicitly stated that the cutting power of the Sith sword is fueled and enhanced by the power of the Sith Lord wielding it, which means that it is a weapon that its power level increases with yours because it's ultimately an extension of you. Whereas lightsabers, at the end of the day, even when you're attuned to the crystal, are ultimately mechanical devices that are calibrated to a specific level. The variance is all mechanical. You're not empowering your lightsaber yourself.
And I particularly like that point because it puts more pressure on the Sith Lord to improve, and basically, essentially, because how competitive it was back in those eras between Sith Lords, it essentially keeps them constantly needing to improve on their fighting techniques in order to stay alive. Because as we all know, particularly in this era, if you're a Sith Lord who falters for even a moment, it's not going to end well for you.
You're going to get deaded, and well, I guess you got the consolation of a massive tomb in the Valley of the Sith Lords, because all of the Great Lords got one of those, but dead is dead.
Dead is dead. Now, keeping with the era of the ancient Sith Empire, we actually have one of the oldest Sith Lords in history, Karnas Mur, who, as we see in a flashback during the Vector comics, originally wielded a yellow blade. specifically a proto-saber yellow blade, which is rare in and of itself.
And this is also in keeping with another thing we see with a lot of Sith Lords, particularly fallen Jedi Sith Lords, of which there are many in this list. They oftentimes will continue wielding their Jedi lightsaber, even if only for a time. Karness Mur did eventually switch out for a conventional lightsaber with a red blade, which again we saw in the flashbacks.
You'll be hearing us say that a lot, by the way, in this video.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff relating to the ancient Sith Empire a lot of it is discussed retroactively by sources that take place long after the fact. I'm actually kind of disappointed that we don't have any novels set within the old Sith Empire. Like, come on, Marka Ragnos is the protagonist of Sith Game of Thrones? I'd be down for that.
Agreed. Definitely would be down for that. Personally, I actually think the yellow really does fit Karness Mur as a character because, well, when you look at what few stories we do have involving his past, he's almost depicted as something of an outsider even among his fellow Sith, just because he's just so out there in terms of his beliefs, and his necromancy abilities really set him apart from the rest. I actually have no doubt that if a story with him was ever produced during his Jedi days, he would definitely be a Jedi Sentinel, because everything just screams Sentinel.
I totally agree with that, because he's another one of those Sith like Darth Plagueis where he did start branching out into the Sith sorcery, but it seems to me that it all ultimately has a root in science. He is a mad scientist, not a sorcerer. And it's like, at the end of the day, I'd say a study of science aligns more with the Jedi Sentinels than it does with the Consulars, because, well, Sentinels are all about practical skills, subterfuge, and stuff like that, whereas Consulars are a pure mystical force focus. So Karness Mur is a fallen Jedi scientist.
Moving from that, we have a character who in no way is a scientist, but is rather intimidating nonetheless. We have the ancient Sith Lord Freeden Nadd, who not only wielded a bronze lightsaber, as far as we know the only Sith Lord to ever do so, but a short saber.
In this case, I'd say it's another case of a fallen Jedi Sith Lord wielding his Jedi lightsaber. And he just kind of kept at it because why bother changing out? It's a good weapon.
Personally, I actually think the bronze really suits Freeden Nadd. It's a really regal, coloration, which is very befitting of a king. And as, we talked about before this, is actually very uncommon even amongst the Jedi.
Bronze represents, well, one thing we all agree on is that it represents both a pursuit of strength, but also a pursuit of regal authority, which it's unusual amongst the Jedi because those are the things that Jedi aren't supposed to strive for, which is kind of another little sign of how Freeden Nadd really was not going to fit in amongst the Jedi.
He never really much had a chance, did he?
No.
Yeah.
He was basically the proto-Exar Kuhn, a ridiculously talented Force user, but he really just didn't fit with the Jedi philosophy because he was too egotistical.
Agreed. Moving on, we have a character who's basically Freeden Nadd's opposite in almost every way, the Sith warrior Warp Null, who, well, this is actually kind of an interesting case because for his original appearance, he was depicted exclusively using a green lightsaber, but it was later revealed in the short story Hammer that the saber he uses actually does contain a red blade.
Now, this is one little thing I find very interesting because as everyone knows, natural crystals versus the Sith synthetic crystals produce blades with different properties. Jedi blades being more stable and more maneuverable, whereas Sith blades are overpowered, they can break other blades, but they're also unstable and they don't handle well. But the idea of using both crystals in your weapon at the same time, and in a manner that allows you to switch back and forth between the two of them, it basically means, in addition to setting up for Trakata counters by alternating the blades, he's also able to reconfigure his weapon's functionality on the fly. He needs to do something quick and whippy, break out the green blade. He's going in for a big cleaving power blow and wants to break your lightsaber, break out the red blade.
And I like that because it adds so many layers to a character who really had very little character to begin with. And I really appreciate when future works are able to expand on certain concepts like that without damaging the overall narrative.
It really, and the other thing I like is because Warp Null is a contemporary of Exar Kun, we see a lot of those same design features that crop up in Kun's lightsaber showing up in Null's, just simplified. But at the same time, it also builds up the commonality with Darth Vader. in the sense that they're both very straightforward, brutal Sith warriors, but they're also cunning and subversive. They use treachery. They're not just blunt instruments. They're clever.
And just to get this out of the way, because I know a lot of people are thinking it, yes, Warb Null is the only character in Star Wars to have a double-bladed lightsaber with blades being opposite colors. The only other time something like that has actually ever even been close to featured was, oh boy, in concept art for The Force Awakens.
Ooh. Of course, the sad thing is that there's really no practical reason why you wouldn't be able to have a double-bladed lightsaber with differently colored blades, especially because most double-bladed lightsabers are literally just two lightsabers welded together at the pommels. Fully integrated mechanisms, I've noted, are actually relatively rare because, on the one hand, a fully integrated mechanism probably improves your weapon's functionality, but on the other hand, it means that if your hilt gets damaged, your weapon is destroyed. Whereas if it's just two separate weapons welded together, one of those weapons is probably still going to be working if the hilt gets cut in half.
And of course we see proof. I was about to say, and of course we see proof of that in the Phantom Menace film during the final battle between Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi.
And on the topic of double-bladed lightsabers, we'll be moving on to the next guy on our list, Exar Kun, who wielded a blue lightsaber up until his death.
And I absolutely love this one because, honestly, I don't think a red saber would really fit well with Exar Kun's character. He's such a pretentious, prick, essentially, who's obsessed with vanity, and I often see his use of his Jedi weapon, even up until his Sith career, as just another way he's mocking the Jedi.
He's a show-off. He's a full-tilt diva. And the other thing is that from a practical perspective, because he wields an archaic saber staff with such a short haft, he's largely restricted to a one-handed grip when both blades are active, which means that he's got to rely on his dexterity to handle that weapon, not his strength. And from a practical perspective, Sith synthetic crystals would actually be a serious liability. They would undercutting his ability to wield his weapon. Whereas Jedi Adegan crystals, more maneuverable, better handling, which is good for what he's doing, as well as the fact that they produce greater blades with better stability, which is also something that I see it as something of a safety concern to have a dual-phase lightsaber with synthetic crystals, because you have crystals that are already unstable on a swivel mount.
A similar situation is at play with Exar Kun's apprentice, the Sith Lord Ulic Kaldroma, who during his publication has actually wielded a variety of lightsaber colors ranging from green to yellowish green to blue, and then back to yellow, but for the majority of his Sith career actually wielded a green lightsaber. And again, I really like this because it emphasizes a lot about his character. The fact that he never fully really committed to the dark side of the Force. It's almost like his green saber is his last sort of link to that old life.
The other thing I find interesting is that the majority of fallen Jedi Sith Lords, I've noticed, even if they switch over to red lightsabers, as Jedi, most of them started off with blue sabers, whereas Ulic Kaldroma with his green, I think, really stands out.
And this is ironic considering that green lightsaber-wielding Jedi are so frequently associated with deep spirituality and connection to the light side of the Force above all else.
And going back to how Ulic never fully committed to the dark side, Ulic was ultimately brought to the dark side by the Sith poison that Satal Keto injected into him. It's like he didn't even willingly commit. He was basically doped up on drugs and indoctrinated.
And again, there's so much character with that. It's as if his green saber's the last, remnant of his old life, and it's the last thing keeping him somewhat grounded.
And it's the one thing he holds on to until his death after he is stripped of the Force.
Again, even though a lot of these elements aren't actually stated in the work itself, you could really play around with it and come to a lot of really interesting conclusions, which you could say a lot about for the Tales of the Jedi series in general. And now jumping ahead a few decades in the timeline, we have the Lord of Betrayal herself, Darth Treya, who, while she did wield a red lightsaber as her primary weapon, was also depicting using 3 purple lightsabers while engaged in telekinetic lightsaber combat.
As well as wielding a green lightsaber when she was trying to pass herself off as a Jedi.
Sneaky, sneaky woman.
Yep. Now, as for where the lightsabers came from, I originally thought that maybe all of the purple lightsabers might have been trophy blades, But at this point, it's just too uniform to be that way. I actually think that the green lightsaber was her original Jedi lightsaber. The red was just the new Sith lightsaber. But the purple lightsabers were also Sith lightsabers, because the uniformity to the blade color makes me think that she probably fabricated a bunch of blades with purple synthetic crystals.
I could definitely see that as a possibility. And again, I like the purple because it kind of reflects, well, again, this is this isn't directly stated in the lore, but generally, again, purple lightsaber users often skirt the line between dark and light. And while Treya is definitely a villain, I think we could both agree on that, she does have certain aspects of her character that kind of tote the line in certain ways. It's almost like she herself is unsure of where she is, and that's reflected in her weaponry.
I would agree with that. And it also kind of gives her a lot of commonality with other fallen Jedi, ideologically driven fallen Jedi like Count Dooku, in that they're not card-carrying villains who have embraced evil. They're ultimately delusional villains who think that they're doing good. And Treya has explicitly stated that she regards the Force as a malevolent entity and wants to destroy it in order to free sentient life from the overarching control of this arrogant, evil god.
And keeping with the idea, I think this is a good time to move into the SWTOR era, which actually featured many Sith who didn't use traditionally red lightsaber blades. In fact, as purple was actually one of the most common secondary colors used by that empire, a good example being the character Valus.
I like this particular detail because this is an era where the Sith Lords are super common, so you're going to get a lot more variance in both in terms of their individual practices as Sith Lords and in the types of weapons that they use, because, well, that many different people are going to make that many different choices. And it does make the Sith a little bit less homogenous, and this is the Sith Order at the time frame when it could be considered the true equal of the Jedi Order in terms of its influence, its organizational structure, and its membership. And at this point, because it's intended to be a direct counterpart, it kind of makes sense for them to have two common blade colors instead of just one. The Jedi have blue and green, the Sith have red and purple.
And we're not saying that the Sith of this era were all like Treya and they were all kind of skirting the line between the dark and the light. It's more of a mechanical utility rather than a spiritual one, which again reflects, the necessities of wartime and what was really going on in that era.
And because on a practical level, there are Sith Lords who do continue wielding lightsabers with natural crystals, which typically produce other colors, because while natural crystals have their own advantages, and I suspect there are a lot of refined Sith duelists who would rather have a more reliable weapon with better handling than an overpowered murder machine.
Speaking of overpowered murder machines, we're going to skip ahead a few thousand years to arguably one of the most famous cases of a Sith not using a traditionally red lightsaber, that being Darth Bane, who in his original publication in the Jedi vs. Sith comic series was actually showcased wielding a purple lightsaber on one of the colors. Now, I think we should definitely emphasize the fact that he never actually wielded a purple blade in the comic itself. This was only featured on one of the comic covers. He was also depicted using a purple lightsaber in the original Guide to Characters, which depicts him with a purple blade as well as his obelisk armor. This was of course retconned with the advent of the Darth Bane trilogy, which depicted him wielding a red blade from the start.
Now, this is just one little inconsistency that it just is what it is, but I'm almost kind of disappointed that they retconned Bane back to wielding a red lightsaber, because him with a purple lightsaber makes him stand out amongst Sith. If anything, I think he was probably the first Sith, like publication history-wise, who was depicted wielding a purple lightsaber.
I actually think you're right about that one. It was the first time, which actually raised a lot of eyebrows for a lot of people. I remember on fan forums back in the day, like, ooh, who's this character? And it actually kind of helped springboard Darth Bane into being such the popular character that he is.
Yeah. It's almost a shame that they didn't try and perhaps reconcile the different blade colors by saying that he wielded a dual-phase lightsaber and switched back and forth.
That would have been very interesting, but I guess it would have been a bit complicated to work into the story. I will say, though, I do prefer him with the curved blade as opposed to the traditional one that they depict him with when he has his purple blade.
I agree, because the the fact is that the curved-hilted lightsaber he wields in the novel, the properties of the weapon are actually discussed and considered. It's not just an aesthetic detail, it's actually a practical thing that figures into his fighting style.
And from a purely visual standpoint, I think Bane's actually one of those cases where I don't feel either of his colors fit him better than the other. Again, as we've talked about, I think the purple fits him for certain reasons as well as the red. And jumping from the most popular EU Sith to not wield a red blade, we have the most popular movie Sith to not wield a red blade, Darth Vader, who, as I think everyone knows at this point, opted to use his blue Jedi lightsaber from the beginning of his career as a Sith during Order 66, and of course the Mustafar duel.
It's another example of a fallen Jedi Sith Lord continuing to use his Jedi lightsaber. However, in Vader's case, I think that this was, even if Mustafar had not taken place, I think it was just a temporary thing, and he probably would have replaced the Adegan crystal with a red crystal and converted the weapon into a Sith lightsaber. He just didn't have time to do that because he had to go purge the Jedi Temple.
Butcher younglings?
He had to go kill children, he had to go kill the evil corporate CEOs, and then he had to get his arms and legs cut off.
As you do, but hey, that's just how it goes sometimes in the Star Wars universe. But again, yeah, as characters go, I definitely prefer Vader with the red blade, because it just, again, further highlights the differences between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. Although, funnily enough, in the original Ralph McQuarrie design concept art, Vader was actually originally depicted with a blue blade. So it's nice that they did keep that consistency.
The other thing I do like is that the revival of the Star Wars Fact File, the first issue, had a profile of Darth Vader's Sith lightsaber, and one of my favorite details is that at some point in his career, he actually replaced the red synthetic crystal given to him by Sidious with a red Adegan crystal. So again, he's still wielding a red lightsaber, but he jumped back to a natural crystal, and it's almost like it's a Jedi lightsaber that's trying to present itself as a Sith lightsaber.
And again, that's kind of interesting because Vader, kind of like Treya, is still somewhat caught between worlds. He's still an evil, tyrannical person no matter what you say about him, but he is still ultimately unable to vanquish that little bit of light that's still inside him.
Yep. Now, moving on to someone who was very successful at vanquishing that little bit of light inside of him, Darth Vader's Sith Master, Darth Sidious. Specifically as depicted in the Dark Empire comic series, and at that point in time, he was wielding a blue lightsaber.
Yeah, a lot of people don't actually know this because the artwork in Dark Empire really makes it ambiguous what color sabers everyone's wielding, but as confirmed by the cover art as well as several Dark Empire toys, the lightsaber that Palpatine does use throughout this series is in fact blue.
Now, I think it's obvious that Palpatine is probably wielding a trophy lightsaber taken from
it's confirmed.
Oh, it is confirmed. In fact, I actually have a theory. In the scene where Palpatine first grabs the lightsaber and ignites it in his fight with Luke in the cloning lab, he pulls it off of a rack with 3 lightsabers. My belief is that those are very specifically the lightsabers of Kit Fisto, Aegon Kolar, and Saisi Tiin, the 3 Jedi that he murdered to death in Revenge of the Sith, and I think he is specifically wielding Aegon Kolar's lightsaber.
Oh my lord. Well, I don't think I'll be able to look at that scene the same ever again. I guess Aegon Kolar has still made it.
Yep.
But however you slice it, honestly, if Palpatine is going to wield a lightsaber other than red, I think blue fits him relatively well.
I like blue lightsabers with Sith Lords because they complement the blue color of Force lightning. It's one reason why I just love the Starkiller clone with his blue lightsabers firing off lightning everywhere.
Destruction. But yeah, and keeping with the Dark Empire series, because I'm sure a lot of people were raising an eyebrow when they saw the thumbnail for this video, we have Luke Skywalker, who, as a lot of people kind of tend to forget, he was officially Sidious' Sith apprentice during the first volume of this series, and continued wielding his Jedi lightsaber, which was green.
I think it's another case where the artwork is a bit ambiguous because within his lightsaber duel with Palpatine at the end of the first Dark Empire series on board the Eclipse, he's depicted as carrying a red blade in that scene. But again, the artwork in Dark Empire itself is very abstract, especially when it comes to coloration. So again, we're deferring to the cover art here, which consistently depicts Luke with a green blade pretty much right across the board.
As do all the Dark Empire merchandise.
Yep. Now, as for why Palpatine let him do it, I guess he just figured that Luke's already using a lightsaber with a synthetic crystal, because as we all know, Luke's green blade is synthetic.
Of course. And again, we've said this before, but this series was published before the crackdown that Lucas, put down with saber colors. So it was still kind of up in the air what faction could wield what color back then, just because, I'm sure someone's thinking that right now.
Yep. The other thing I do find interesting, though, is that when Luke was depicted as constructing his Shoto lightsaber in order to contend with Lumaya's light whip, that Shoto projected a red blade. And he constructed it as a Jedi before he signed on with Sidious as a Sith apprentice in Dark Empire. So, again, unusual case of a Jedi with a red lightsaber. And I think it's probably a pretty clear indication that the Shoto he constructed probably uses a synthetic crystal as well. It's just that one was a bit of a rush job, so he didn't alter the forging process to produce a color other than red.
I could definitely see that as a possibility. It definitely makes sense for the nature of the story. Speaking of that story, we are moving on to Lumaya, the Dark Lady of the Sith, who not only doesn't utilize a traditional lightsaber, instead opting for the more obscure light whip, but the energy portion of her light whip is often depicted as either yellow or something of a bright white. Again, further differentiating her from the typical Sith tradition.
It's also discussed that the energy blade on her light whip is actually produced by a Kyber crystal. So, yeah, that's what color Kyber crystal blade is going to be. It's going to be yellowy white.
Again, I really like this. It's kind of like a Karnas Mirth thing, where Lumaya has so many esoteric abilities and such a unique view of the Force that it really does seem fitting that her lightsaber would reflect a almost Sentinel-like mentality, even though she's obviously not a Jedi Sentinel.
But ironically, even though she's not a Jedi Sentinel, the fact that she started off being trained as a covert operative and spy means that her overall skill set still aligns pretty closely with that of a Sentinel. Though, if I had to place Lumaya's sort of Sith class, Sith assassin / infiltrator.
Definitely. But again, it's not like there isn't a precedent for red light whips. We have people like Githany, for example, from the Darth Bane series, who does wield a red light whip. So it's not like there's no precedence for it.
Yep. But Lumaya's weapon is, well, it is unusual because it is like a Sith weapon top to bottom. It's explicitly stated to be based off of ancient Sith designs. And, even the Kyber crystal, technically speaking, is a Sith artifact from the Sith Temple of Pomojima on Mimban, because Sith. But I guess moving on to the next Sith Lord on our list, we have Lomi Plo, who wielded...
Also known as Giant Terrifying Bug Lady.
Yes. And she carried twin lightsabers, one white and the other purple.
Yes, again, very unique. The only confirmed Sith Lord ever to wield a white blade.
Which I think is unusual because, while you'd think Sith Lords would kind of shy away from solid, hard white, but, then again, some of them might have the whole mentality of, the brightest light casts the darkest shadow, flee from my shadows.
I definitely wouldn't put it past her, because Lomi Plo is such a... Well, I mean, she's not a very unique character because she doesn't really have that much character, but she's just so primal and instinct-driven that you can never really predict what she's going to do next. So why wouldn't she have lightsaber blades that differentiate from the Sith norm? It's just another thing that sets her apart from what you'd expect.
Do you have any theories as to what sort of crystals she uses? Is she using trophy lightsabers with natural crystals, or did she fabricate some non-red synthetics?
It's never really been directly confirmed, although if you do want to have a case of her wielding a synthetic lightsaber crystal, she did actually briefly use Luke's green blade after her first encounter with the Jedi in the Swarm War.
There you go.
Circling back to the Skywalker Solo clan, we have Darth Kydus, who, interestingly enough, has actually used a lightsaber color other than red for the majority of his Sith career, only opting to actually construct and use a red blade in the novel Revelation.
Now, he's another example of a fallen Jedi Sith Lord continuing to use his Jedi lightsaber, and in his case, again, it was a practical decision. He didn't want to broadcast his defection to the Sith until he was confident that he was kind of established and had consolidated his hold over things. But he was explicit. He did explicitly intend to replace the green blade with a red one. It's just constructing a lightsaber is not something you can do overnight unless you're really, really, really good. So he was taking his time with it, but yeah.
And again, it just sets him apart so much from your average Jedi turned Sith Lord. As we've discussed at several points, the majority of characters who turn this way started out with blue lightsaber blades and were very martially focused. But as I think any fan of Jason Solo will tell you, everything about him just screams Jedi Consular. Not just with the green blade, but also his overall view of the Force, which makes his fall all the more tragic.
In a lot of ways, Darth Sidious was almost a Darth Treya Mark II, who again continuously skirted the line between light and dark and was convinced that he was doing right. It's just in Sidious's case, when you read the novels, he's completely insane. He's basically just operating on pure self-delusion.
Yeah, he kind of believes that he can, mesh worlds between Sith philosophy and love and empathy, which, as we all know, doesn't really work.
No, it doesn't. He's another one of the Darth Gravid Sith Lords who just tried to straddle a line and just...
Last but not least, we have Darth Kray, who, while depicted using red sabers for the majority of his appearances, does use his old Jedi green lightsaber blade during the war arc.
Now, the thing I do kind of like about this is that Kray, even in his showings as Asherad Het, he basically spent his entire career as a Jedi and a Sith, jumping back and forth between green and red. In the Outlander arc of the Star Wars Republic comic series, where he made his debut, he and his father Sherad Het actually wielded red lightsabers.
Although this was later retconned by the Kenobi novel.
Which angers me, because I like the idea of them starting off with red lightsabers generated by red Adegan crystals, but then with Asherad Het switching over to green once he formally joined the Jedi Order, probably just better crystals that improved his weapon's functionality. But then when he becomes a Sith Lord, back to red, because death.
But as far as how it affects his character, I think that it's interesting because, Asherad Het always took such great pride in his father's lightsaber. In fact, his father's lightsaber is kind of the Oedipus for how the Outlander story kind of begins. So the fact that even after all these decades and all these trials, he's still not able to fully get rid of it or even change the crystal out, I think says a lot about his character.
Well, actually, I noticed in the comics that he only has the green lightsaber during his fight with Darth Weirlock, but then when we see him later fighting against Cade Skywalker, it is red. So I think he did replace the crystal, but it's like trying...
How come I never noticed that? Huh.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to which hilt is in his hand. But yeah, he did switch...
I've been in that comic for years, and I never noticed that.
But still, it's like the thing I like about that, though, is that it's like he's trying to convert the weapon into a Sith lightsaber to declare his allegiance to the Sith, but he's just reverting to the red that the weapon originally projected. Like, it's just kind of showing that he can never truly escape his past.
Which is a big element of his character, everything coming full circle in the end, which is not, I was going to say the tragedy of Darth Kray, but it's not so much a tragedy as it is just ironic.
Yep. Kray is kind of interesting because everything about him is ultimately all based on denial. Like, the reason why he refused to take off his Tusken wrappings for so long is because he was in denial of his humanity and didn't like the fact that he wasn't a purebred Tusken.
And then tattooing his face to make himself look less human.
Yeah, and then as Darth Kray, Lord of the Sith, he spent most of his career wearing this theatrical horned mask. It's like, yeah, most of the armor and the implants were implanted into his body and were eating him. The helmet, he could take it off whenever he wanted. That he didn't need to present a false face the way Darth Vader did. He could show everyone who he was, but again, it's all about denying the humanity, denying the weakness, and presenting himself as invincible and all-powerful.
When, as we all know, he truly wasn't. But then again, that's the fall of most Sith Lords, be they red lightsaber users or not.
That being said, I do kind of appreciate that the big turning point in his career as a Sith is when he comes back, he's not wearing the helmet anymore. He actually is showing his real face.
He looks I think he actually looks way cooler without all the theatrical armor anyway. So overall, there are a few overarching themes with all of these characters. The majority of the Sith featured here were either fallen Jedi or opted for different weaponry as a matter of practicality.
Examples of Sith who opted for non-red lightsabers for practical reasons would be Null, Lumaya, as well as the numerous Sith within the SWTOR era.
Meanwhile, the fallen Jedi include people, of course, like Exar Kuhn, Ulic Kaldroma, Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader, and Darth Sidious.
And of course, in the case of Dark Empire or Palpatine, you got Sith Lords who carry trophy Jedi lightsabers because they're evil.
And again, this really just further showcases the overall complexity of the Star Wars universe. How the fact that breaking from such a stingent tradition like the red lightsaber blade isn't necessarily always motivated by the same factors. Well guys, we hope you enjoyed our dive into Sith who do not wield red lightsabers. If you enjoyed this and want to see a sequel video where we discuss Jedi who wielded crimson blades, let us know in the comments section below. Thank you to Jenserai1 for joining me for this discussion. May the Force be with you. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys later.
Good night.